The first thing Sailor found in the abandoned house was not a loose board or a mouse or one of the many leaks dripping into coffee cans across the upstairs hall. It was a lavender thread, thin as a hair, caught beneath the edge of a door that every person in town claimed had been locked for 30 years. Graham Voss saw the thread only because his dog refused to move. The old yellow house sat at the far end of Millstone Road, just past the last bait shop and the first view of the harbor. It had once been handsome in a plain, useful way, with deep porches, square windows, and a roof angled against winter rain. By the time Graham bought it, the paint had gone chalky, the gutters sagged like tired shoulders, and the yard had grown so high that the front steps looked like they were wading through grass. People in Bay Harbor had stopped calling it a house. They called it the Win Place, the Old Place, or the one nobody wanted. That suited Graham more than he admitted. He had come back to town after 23 years of Navy schedules, parts lists, duty rosters, and mornings that began before the rest of the world had decided what kind of day it wanted to be. He knew how to inventory supplies. He knew how to repair a galley fan with a borrowed wrench and 2 patient hands. He knew how to label a cabinet so that the next person did not have to ask where anything belonged. What he did not know was how to be home in a town that still remembered the version of him who had left in a borrowed jacket and not much else. At 52, Graham had the careful posture of a man used to narrow passageways and the quiet eyes of someone who had spent years solving practical problems without needing applause. He did not come back with stories. He came back with a pickup truck, a service dog named Sailor, 2 footlockers, and a habit of making lists on yellow pads before sunrise. The people at the county auction thought he was making a mistake. "That place will empty your wallet," the clerk told him while sliding papers across a folding table. "Might already match my wallet," Graham said. The clerk did not laugh. She looked at the bid sheet, then at Graham's worn canvas coat, then at Sailor lying perfectly still beside his boot. Her face softened in the way people soften when they think a man is about to learn something expensive. "You got family to help?" "No." "Contractor?" "No." "You know the West Side Foundation dips?" "I noticed." "You know the back chimney needs repointing?" "I noticed that too." She tapped the papers with her pen. "And you still want it?" Graham looked out the window toward the harbor. Gulls moved over the water in slow, white arcs. He had spent years missing that sound without admitting it to anyone. He had also spent years imagining a house where every object had a place, every morning had a task, and nobody knocked on his door unless they meant it. "I want something that needs work," he said. That answer followed him home. By the end of his first week, neighbors had decided the Win Place would beat him. They did not say it cruelly. Bay Harbor people wrapped doubt in concern and brought it over in paper bags. One woman left soup on the porch and told him to heat it slowly. The retired mail carrier stopped by with a box of mismatched screws and said the previous owner never threw out anything useful. The owner of the bait shop offered him a name for a roofer, then lowered his voice and said the locked room upstairs was not worth bothering with. "What locked room?" Graham asked. The bait shop owner, a compact man named Leon with sun-browned arms and a white beard trimmed close to his chin, pointed toward the house as if it could hear him. "Second floor, north corner, door with a brass plate. Nobody's had the key since I was young." "Who locked it?" "Depends who you ask." "I'm asking you." Leon looked at Sailor, who was sitting beside Graham with his ears half lifted toward the house. "My mother said Mrs. Wynne kept sewing machines in there. My uncle said it was storage. Idabel says it was a sitting room. Every story changes depending on who's telling it." Did anyone try opening it? Sure, years ago. And? Door held. Graham nodded, more interested in the phrase than the fact. Door held. It sounded less like a failure and more like a report. That evening, he found the room. The upstairs hall was narrow and smelled of dust, old pine, and rainwater that had traveled through too many places before landing in the buckets he had set along the floor. 4 doors opened easily. One bedroom still had faded wallpaper with blue vines. Another had a rusted bed frame. A bathroom leaned toward the back of the house as if tired of being a bathroom. At the end of the hall, the north corner door stood plain and shut. A brass plate near the knob held 2 engraved words. Mending room. Graham wiped the plate with his thumb. The words emerged slowly, not shiny, just legible. Sailor stepped forward and sniffed the gap beneath the door. He was a deep-chested mixed breed with a black coat, a white blaze on his nose, and the calm focus of an animal who considered every room a map. He had been trained to notice Graham's breathing, balance, and changes in routine. But in old houses, Sailor had another talent. He found what Graham missed. That night, he found lavender thread. It rested under the door, curled in dust. Sailor touched it with his nose, then looked up at Graham. "It's thread," Graham said. Sailor did not move. Graham crouched with one knee complaining under him and picked up the thread. It was faded purple, slightly rough, and smelled faintly of wool and something floral. Lavender, maybe. Or soap. He turned it between his fingers, then looked at the lock. The keyhole was old, round, and clean compared with the rest of the door. Someone had cared about this room longer than the rest of the house. Graham did not force it. That was the first thing the town would later get wrong about the story. People would say he broke into the room. They would say Sailor scratched until the door opened. They would say the secret was waiting in a dramatic cloud of dust. None of that was true. Graham left the door alone. He had learned in the Navy that stubborn equipment often told you how to help it if you stopped treating it like an enemy. A stuck valve did not need anger. It needed light, patience, the right tool, and someone willing to understand why it was stuck in the first place. So he made the locked room a line item, not a contest. Repair roof leak above upstairs hall. Clear gutters. Test north corner door. Find key if key exists. For 3 weeks, the house gave him more immediate problems. A kitchen pipe sweated behind the sink. The front porch needed new stair treads. 2 upstairs windows rattled in the wind. The furnace started only after Graham cleaned the filter, replaced one corroded connector, and spoke to it in the low, steady voice he used for machines and anxious people. Every morning, he tied back the curtains, opened windows for 15 minutes, fed Sailor, made coffee in a dented percolator, and wrote the day's tasks on a pad. He worked until his shoulder stiffened, rested before pride could make him careless, and ended each evening by sweeping one more room than he felt like sweeping. At first, the routine kept him moving. Then it started keeping other things away. The quiet after dinner was the hardest. During the day, the house spoke in repairs. At night, it went still, and the stillness left too much space for Graham to notice how few people expected anything from him anymore. In the Navy, usefulness had been built into every hour. There was always a watch to stand, a valve to inspect, a supply count to double-check, a meal line to keep moving, a younger sailor who needed to be shown a better way to coil rope or label a shelf. Back in Bay Harbor, usefulness had to be requested. No one requested Graham. Sailor did, in his own way. He nudged Graham's hand when the house got too quiet. He placed his chin on Graham's knee when Graham stared too long at the same unopened box. Once, on a cold Wednesday night, he brought Graham a single wool sock from the laundry basket and dropped it on his boot with solemn care, as if the sock contained instructions for carrying on. Graham laughed for the first time that week. "That's not regulation," he told the dog. Sailor wagged once, satisfied. By the fourth week, Graham had earned a cautious kind of town attention. People slowed down when passing the Wynn place. They noticed the cleared front walk, the repaired porch rail, the stacked brush by the road, the upstairs windows cracked open in the afternoon. Someone left a coil of extension cord with a note that said, "You can keep this if it helps." Someone else left a coffee can full of old brass screws. Graham accepted the objects more easily than conversation. He labeled the coffee can brass, sorted the screws by length, and put the note in a kitchen drawer. That drawer became the first clue after the thread. It stuck one rainy morning when Graham was looking for a small flathead screwdriver. The drawer was in the old pantry, built into a wall of shelves deep enough for flour tins, jars, and folded sacks. He had already cleaned the pantry twice, but old houses hid dirt the way ships hid rust, in corners that looked finished until you looked from the other angle. The drawer opened 3 inches and stopped. Graham pulled gently. It did not budge. Sailor, who had been lying near the back door, lifted his head. His nose twitched. He stood, walked into the pantry, and pushed his muzzle toward the lower shelves. "Not your breakfast," Graham said. Sailor ignored him and pressed one paw against the baseboard. Graham got down with a flashlight. Behind the stuck drawer, wedged between the cabinet wall and a support rail, was a wooden spool wrapped in gray thread. Not new gray, old gray, the soft shade of work shirts washed many times. He removed the drawer, slid the spool free, and held it in his palm. There was a label on one end written in ink. Fisher Coat Cuffs. No name, no date, just a task. He turned it over and found a second note pressed into the hollow of the spool, folded small and brittle at the edges. Graham unfolded it on the kitchen table with the patience of a man handling an old chart. 2 words. North Linen. Sailor sat beside him watching. "You know where that is?" Graham asked. Sailor stood. The north linen closet was across from the locked mending room. Graham had opened it once and found yellowed sheets, cracked shelf paper, and the smell of cedar. He had put cleaning it near the bottom of his list because linen closets did not leak, sag, or threaten to drop plaster on anyone's head. Sailor had different priorities. He trotted upstairs, stopped at the closet door, and looked back. Inside, nothing seemed unusual until Graham removed the sheets. Behind them, the back wall was not plaster. It was beadboard, painted the same dull cream as the rest of the closet. One vertical board had a notch near the floor, so small he would have missed it standing up. Graham pressed the notch. The board shifted. He stopped breathing for a second, then laughed quietly at himself. "Well," he said, "somebody did not want to lose the room completely." The panel opened into darkness. Not a room, not yet. A narrow passage, shoulder width, lined with old studs and smelling of cedar, dust, lavender, and dry wool. It ran behind the hallway wall toward the locked door. Graham did not step through. The floorboards looked intact, but he had been wrong before about things that looked intact. He brought a lantern, a mask, a tape measure, and a small mirror. He tested each board. He checked for nails. He spoke calmly to Sailor, not because the dog needed it, but because the sound of his own voice kept him from treating the discovery like a dare. At the end of the passage was the back of the mending room. A second door stood there, narrower than the hallway door, with a simple latch on Graham's side. He touched the latch and stopped. For reasons he could not explain, opening that door felt less like entering a room and more like answering a question someone had left behind. Sailor sniffed the threshold, then sat. So Graham opened it. The room did not give up its story all at once. At first it was only shapes in stale air. A table under the window, a treadle sewing machine covered by a cloth, cabinets with glass fronts, a dress form leaning slightly to one side, shelves stacked with folded fabric. The curtains had gone gray from years without washing, but they were still tied back. Whoever left this room had not abandoned it in chaos. They had closed it as if intending to return after supper. Graham stood still until his eyes adjusted. The north window looked toward the harbor. Beyond the dusty glass, he could see the masts at the marina, the low roof of Leon's bait shop, and the narrow road that curved toward town. The person sewing at that table would have seen who came and went. They would have seen weather changing over the water. They would have known when a coat needed new lining before the owner had admitted it. Sailor walked in slowly, nose close to the floor. He did not bark. He did not disturb anything. He followed a trail only he could read, from the table to a cabinet, from the cabinet to a basket beneath the window, from the basket to the corner where several rolls of wool leaned against the wall. One roll had come loose. From it spilled small squares of fabric, each about the size of Graham's hand. Some were denim, some flannel, some sturdy cotton, some heavy coat wool. Each square had a paper tag pinned to it with a name. Edith Mercer, apron pocket. Tom Bell, harbor coat. Luis Navarro, work shirt. Mara Chen, quilt return. Graham read the tags aloud in a low voice. Names he knew from storefronts, mailboxes, donated benches, and the carved sign outside the community hall. Some belonged to people still living. Some belonged to parents and grandparents. The room was not storage. It was a record, but not the kind kept in ledgers and file cabinets. It was a record of repairs. He found the ledger on the second day. The first day he did nothing except open the window, photograph the room before moving items, cover the sewing machine again, and close the passage door behind him. He slept badly that night. Not because the room frightened him, but because it had made the rest of the house feel inhabited by expectation. The next morning he wrote a new list. Document mending room. Do not remove items without notes. Ask Leon about names. Find room key. The key was hanging in plain sight. Sailor found it by nosing a lavender sachet that hung from a hook near the inside of the hallway door. The sachet had faded to the color of weak tea. Behind it, on the same hook, was a brass key tied with blue thread. Graham unlocked the hallway door from inside and opened it for the first time in decades. The door did not creak dramatically. It opened with the tired sigh of wood that had waited long enough. By noon, Leon stood in the hallway, hat in both hands. "My mother was right," he said. Graham had invited him because the names were not Graham's to interpret alone. Leon stepped into the mending room with the cautious reverence of a man entering a place he had heard about at kitchen tables all his life, but never expected to see. He touched nothing at first. Then he saw a rack of navy pea coats, fishermen's coats, wool jackets, and canvas work aprons, each tagged at the sleeve with a pinned card. "That's my father's handwriting," Leon whispered. "On which one?" Leon pointed to a card that read, "Bell coat, left pocket, save buttons." He swallowed once, then steadied himself. He lost the buttons every winter. My mother said Mrs. Wynne had patience for small things, said that was rarer than talent. Graham looked around the room. Small things were everywhere. A tin of buttons sorted by color, drawers labeled cuffs, collars, pockets, linings, a jar of thimbles, a basket of washed dog blankets with hand-stitched name tags, stacked quilt squares, measuring tapes coiled on hooks, a notebook beside the sewing machine. The ledger was in the bottom drawer of a cabinet marked Returns. It was not hidden. It had been waiting among folded brown paper, twine, and a clean pair of scissors. The cover was cloth-bound, navy blue faded toward gray. Inside, each page had columns drawn by hand. Date, name, item, repair, paid, owed, notes. Graham expected old accounts. He found something else. For many entries, the paid column held small amounts: 25 cents, 12 cents, 2 eggs, 1 jar of peaches, helped stack wood, fixed porch latch, brought flour. For others, the paid column said nothing at all. But the notes column never said charity. It said, return quietly. It said, use side door. It said, add warm lining, no charge listed. It said, new blanket for dog, old one too thin. Graham had to sit down when he read that one. Sailor rested his head against Graham's knee. Leon turned a page and found his mother's name. Ellen Bell, blue dress, hem lowered, paid with haddock stew. He smiled, then covered his mouth with the back of his hand. She hated asking, he said. She used to say, Mrs. Wynne knew how to help without making a person feel small. That sentence became the hinge of everything. Bay Harbor did not need another charming old house. It needed what the room remembered. But Graham was not ready to become the person who gave it back. For the next week, he did exactly what he knew how to do. He cataloged, he measured, he made condition notes, he photographed labels, he cleaned the windows, not the shelves. He called the county historical office and asked how to preserve cloth without ruining it. He made acid-free tags from supplies a woman at the library helped him order. He wrote down every name in the ledger and cross-checked what he could against public records, shop signs, old yearbooks, and the memories of people who stopped by and pretended they had only come to return a borrowed tool. Each visitor left with a story. Ida Bell, Leon's older sister, stood in the mending room and found an unfinished quilt square with her aunt's name pinned to it. The square was made from striped ticking and a piece of green cotton. That green was from our kitchen curtains, she said. I remember because my aunt thought they made the room look cheerful, even when the stove smoked. A man named Cal Mercer recognized his grandmother's apron pocket because she had sewn a tiny red X inside it to remind herself which side held the house key. A retired teacher found her father's work shirt, repaired at both elbows with neat blue patches. A quiet woman who ran the florist shop found dog blankets with names from families that had once lived along the docks. Every discovery changed the room a little. Not physically. Graham would not let anyone rush the process. But the room stopped feeling like a sealed secret and started feeling like a doorway. Sailor became its unofficial guide. He greeted each visitor at the stairs, then led them to the room with the solemn confidence of a host who had always known they belonged there. If someone stepped too close to a fragile stack, he leaned gently against their leg. If Graham grew tense from too many voices, Sailor came to his side and pressed his shoulder into Graham's knee until Graham took one slow breath, then another. People noticed. He's a good dog, Ida said. He's better than good, Graham replied before thinking. It was the most open thing he had said since coming back. The local paper heard about the room by accident. A reporter named Nessa came to ask about the house restoration, but Sailor led her upstairs while Graham was trying to explain porch drainage. Nessa saw the ledger, the fabric squares, and the line of names pinned to objects that had once been ordinary enough to wear out. "Can I write about this?" she asked. Graham said no. He said it too quickly. Nessa lowered her notebook. "All right. It's not mine to turn into a story." "Whose is it?" He looked at the ledger. "I'm working on that." That night he could not sleep. Rain tapped against the repaired roof. Sailor lay beside the bed, one paw twitching in a dream. The house breathed around them, pipes settling, wood cooling, wind moving under the eaves. Graham thought about Nessa's question. Whose is it? He had spent years inside systems where ownership was clear. A tool was checked out, signed for, returned, inspected. A task had a division, a person, a deadline. The mending room did not work that way. It belonged to the people who had used it, the people who had kept it quiet, the people whose names were still pinned to cloth, and maybe to the ones who needed it next. But Graham was afraid of the next. He knew how to repair a door. He did not know how to become a gathering point. He knew how to keep shelves in order. He did not know how to let a town come through his house carrying stories, needs, expectations, casseroles, opinions, and advice about wallpaper. The next morning, he almost closed the room again. He walked upstairs with the brass key in his hand. Sailor followed, slower than usual, watching him. Graham stood in the doorway and looked at the sewing machine, the ledger, the pinned names, the dog blankets folded with a neatness that made his chest ache. "Maybe this is enough," he said. Sailor walked past him, went to the linen closet passage, and disappeared into the narrow space. "Sailor?" The dog's tail thumped once from the dark. Graham followed with a flashlight. Sailor had stopped halfway through the passage, nose pressed against the lower wall. One board there sat proud of the others by less than a finger's width. Graham had missed it because he had been careful, and sometimes careful people only see the dangers they expect. He pried the board loose with a putty scraper. Behind it was a shallow compartment holding a tin box, a folded canvas apron, and a bundle of cards tied with white thread. The tin box contained keys. Not one key. 12. Each had a tag. Side door, thread cabinet, donations drawer, oil room, quilt frame, back gate. The bundle of cards was something else entirely. They were recipe-sized cards, but not for food. Each one listed a simple repair in clear handwriting. How to patch a coat lining without showing the stitch. How to shorten trousers without wasting fabric. How to replace a button so it does not pull loose. How to make a dog blanket from a worn wool coat. How to measure someone without making them feel inspected. How to say yes when a person is ashamed to ask. Graham read the last one 3 times. The card did not tell a person to be generous. It gave a procedure. Offer tea first. Ask what needs fixing, not why. Keep prices posted, then mark accounts paid by service when needed. Never discuss one person's account with another. Return finished work wrapped and clean. If someone cannot come to the front door, use the side entrance and do not mention it. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, was one sentence. Dignity is also a repair. Graham sat back on his heels in the passage. Sailor leaned against him. That was the earned reveal. Not the room, not the hidden entrance, not even the ledger. The real secret of the Wynn place was that care had been organized here with the same seriousness other people reserved for business, weather, and church suppers. Someone had built a system for helping adults keep going without turning their need into a town performance. Graham knew systems. For the first time since he had signed the papers, the house did not feel like a burden he had purchased because he did not know what else to do with himself. It felt like a set of instructions written in a language he already understood. He called Nessa. "You can write about the room," he said. "Are you sure?" "Not as a curiosity." "Then how?" Graham looked at the card in his hand. "As a place that is reopening." There was a pause on the line. "Is it?" Graham took a breath. "It will be." Once he said it, the house changed speed. Graham did not throw open the doors and invite chaos. He made a plan. First, he asked the historical office to help preserve the oldest items and create a small display in the front parlor. Then he called the library and asked whether anyone in town still knew hand sewing, machine repair, tailoring, quilting, or fabric care. The librarian, a woman named Pearl who had been waiting 20 years for someone to ask the right question, gave him 17 names. Within 3 days, he had 7 volunteers. Within a week, he had too many. Graham handled it the way he handled crowded supply rooms. He made categories: preservation team, repair team, teaching team, tea and intake, donations, building maintenance. He refused to call anyone a helper unless they liked the word. He called them crew members instead, and for reasons nobody examined too closely, the name stuck. The first meeting happened in the kitchen because the mending room was too fragile for coffee cups and wet shoes. Sailor lay under the table while 7 adults argued politely about whether a new sewing machine should be bought or whether Mrs. Wynn's old treadle machine should be repaired first. "Both," Graham said. Everyone looked at him. "Old machine for demonstration after it's inspected. New machine for daily use. We do not risk the original just to prove a point." Pearl smiled. "Listen to the man with the clipboard. It's a yellow pad. Same spirit." They laughed and Graham almost looked away. Then Sailor placed one paw on his boot, grounding him before he could retreat behind the refrigerator door. The first public mending night was scheduled for the second Thursday in May. Graham expected 5 people. 32 came. They did not come all at once. That would have been easier to count and harder to absorb. They came in small streams, parking along Millstone Road, stepping carefully over the repaired front threshold, carrying paper bags, folded coats, aprons, canvas totes, wool blankets, and one cracked sewing box that smelled like cedar chips. The front parlor held the preserved display. The ledger was open under glass to a page that listed names now spoken with recognition. Fabric squares hung on a temporary line, each with a new tag explaining what was known and what still needed to be learned. A sign near the door said, "Repairs by donation or trade. Ask at the kitchen table. Privacy respected." No one had suggested that last line. Graham wrote it himself. The kitchen became intake. Pearl poured tea. Ida wrote names on cards. Leon took coats upstairs to the work tables. Cal Mercer carried boxes without being asked. Nessa came without her notebook for once and sat near the window replacing buttons on a denim jacket while listening to a woman explain how her father had once fixed the Wynn back gate in exchange for a winter coat lining. Graham moved through the rooms with a clipboard after all, checking lights, extension cords, chair placement, and the flow of people on the stairs. He had worried the house would feel invaded. Instead, it felt relieved. Sailor made the night work. He greeted nervous newcomers at the side door, the same side door named on the old card. He led them to the kitchen table, then returned to Graham with a look that meant another person had arrived carrying something heavier than fabric. He brought Pearl a dropped spool. He sat beside a man who could not quite explain why he had brought his late father's work jacket after keeping it in a closet for years. The man did not say much. He did not have to. A volunteer measured the torn lining. Graham found a matching roll of cloth, and Sailor rested his chin on the man's shoe, until the man managed to smile. Nothing dramatic happened that night. That was why it mattered. Buttons were replaced. Seams were reinforced. Coat pockets were restitched. A canvas bag got a new strap. 2 dog blankets were cut from worn wool and bound with soft cotton. A woman learned how to patch her favorite work apron. A retired bookkeeper offered to organize repair carts. Someone brought fresh bread. Someone else signed up to fix the loose porch railing before the next mending night. Near the end, Graham saw a young adult from the marina standing alone in the hallway, holding a folded uniform shirt from a harbor tour company. The sleeve was torn at the cuff. He looked ready to leave without asking. Graham recognized the posture. He had seen it in sailors too proud to request instruction, in neighbors too tired to explain need, in himself at the county auction pretending he only wanted a project. He walked over slowly. "What needs fixing?" Graham asked. The young man looked at the shirt. "Cuff? You need it soon? Tomorrow? We can do that. I can pay." "Good. Prices are on the card. If cash is tight, there are other ways to settle up. Porch rail needs sanding." The young man looked at him, searching for pity and not finding any. "I can sand. Then we're square." Graham took the shirt and wrote the intake card himself. Only later did he realize he had followed Mrs. Wynn's instructions exactly. At 10 o'clock, the last visitors left. The house settled into a new kind of quiet. Not empty, rested. Graham stood in the mending room with Sailor beside him. The old machine had not been used yet, but it had been cleaned and oiled by a woman who knew treadles. The new machine sat on a side table. The ledger rested safely downstairs. Fresh repair cards filled a wooden box. The old recipe-sized instruction cards were copied and pinned to a board where volunteers could read them. On the wall, Pearl had hung a new sign, hand-lettered in blue. The Wynn Mending Room. Under it, in smaller letters, she had added, "Reopened by neighbors, guided by Sailor." Graham pretended not to see the second line until everyone left. Then he stood in front of it for a long time. "You know they put your name on the wall," he told the dog. Sailor wagged once. "Don't let it affect your work ethic," Sailor sneezed. After that night, the Wynn place no longer belonged to rumor. It belonged to Thursdays. Every Thursday, lights glowed in the windows and cars lined Millstone Road. People came with mending, yes, but also with small skills they had forgotten counted as skills. One woman taught hemming. Leon taught knotting for bag handles using scraps of cord. Pearl taught record-keeping. Cal Mercer fixed a donated iron. A retired restaurant cook began bringing soup because people working with their hands forgot to eat. Graham set up a maintenance board in the pantry and kept the building running with quiet precision. The locked room became the least locked place in town, but it never became careless. Graham insisted on rules that felt old-fashioned until everyone understood them. Names stayed private unless people chose otherwise. Accounts were never discussed in public. Donations went in a box, trades on cards, building expenses on a sheet tacked inside the pantry. Fragile historical items stayed preserved. Working supplies stayed labeled. If someone came to the side door, no one asked why. The side door became important. At first, only a few used it. Adults who did not want to arrive in front of a crowd, people who worked late, people who were embarrassed by a torn coat, a missing button, a bag held together with tape. Graham kept that door lit, swept, and easy to open. Sailor learned to listen for the soft knock there. When it came, he rose from wherever he had been sleeping and looked at Graham as if reporting for duty. By September, the Wynn place had become useful enough that people stopped calling Graham brave for buying it. That was a relief. He had never liked praise that mistook desperation for courage. The house still needed work. The West Foundation needed professional attention. The back chimney was scheduled for repairs. The upstairs hallway would need fresh plaster. The porch paint had to wait until spring. Graham kept lists for all of it, but he no longer worked alone. That afternoon, as sunlight moved across the porch boards, Graham noticed something he had not expected. The house looked less rejected, not because every flaw had been fixed, but because people had stopped treating its flaws as reasons to stay away. They had become tasks, shared tasks, the kind that made room for conversation without forcing it. He understood then why Mrs. Wynne had kept a ledger. It was not about who owed what. It was about remembering that everyone had something to bring. Eggs, soup, sanding, sewing, bookkeeping, a ride, a repaired latch, a hand steady enough to stitch a cuff, a dog patient enough to sit beside the side door until someone found the courage to knock. The final piece of the old mystery arrived on the first cold Thursday of October. Graham was closing the mending room window when Sailor pawed at the lower drawer of the sewing table. Graham had already checked it twice. It held bobbins, chalk, and folded paper patterns. But Sailor did not paw randomly. Graham opened the drawer and removed everything one item at a time. At the back, taped beneath a removable tray, was a sealed envelope. On the front, in the same handwriting as the instruction cards, were the words, "For whoever opens the room again." Graham did not open it alone. He carried it downstairs to the kitchen where Pearl, Leon, Ida, Mara, Cal, Nessa, and half a dozen others were cleaning up after mending night. He set it on the table. Nobody spoke for several seconds. "You found it," Pearl said. Sailor found it. That seemed right to everyone. Inside was a single page. "If this room has been closed a long time, do not be ashamed of that. Houses rest when people forget what to do with them. Open the windows first. Sort what can be saved. Keep the side door working. Do not make help into a performance. Ask for trades when pride needs a place to stand. Teach what you know. Learn what you do not. If you are alone, begin with one useful task. One useful task has a way of inviting the next." Graham read it aloud once, his voice steady until the last line. "The room was never mine. It was only in my care." When he finished, the kitchen stayed quiet. Not sad, not empty, just full. Sailor moved under the table and rested his head on Graham's boot. The following week, Graham framed a copy of the letter and hung it near the side door. Not in the parlor display where people looked at history. Near the door, where people came in carrying the present. By winter, the Wynne mending room had a calendar. First Thursdays for repairs, second Thursdays for sewing lessons, third Thursdays for household fixes, because Graham had learned that the same people who needed buttons replaced often needed a lamp rewired, a chair tightened, or a drawer unstuck. Fourth Thursdays became skill trades. Someone taught budgeting for seasonal work. Someone taught how to sharpen kitchen knives safely. Someone taught basic radio communication for harbor volunteers. Graham taught labels, maintenance logs, and the beauty of putting tools back where tired hands could find them. He did not talk much about the Navy. When he did, it was about systems that kept people fed, dry, informed, and ready for the next task. He talked about how a checklist was not a lack of trust, it was a way of caring for the person who came after you. He talked about how a clean workspace lowered stress. He talked about how a well-marked shelf could save more time than a heroic speech. People listened because the house proved him right every Thursday. The rejected veteran and the rejected place became harder to separate. Both had been misread as worn out. Both still had structure. Both needed patient repair, honest work, and a reason to open the door again. In late December, Bay Harbor held its first winter coat repair day at the Wynne place. The event was meant to last 4 hours. It lasted 9. Volunteers reinforced cuffs, replaced linings, patched pockets, and matched buttons from Mrs. Wynn's old tins. The finished coats hung along the parlor wall, wrapped in brown paper with name cards tucked inside. A soup pot steamed in the kitchen. The porch light stayed on long after dark. Near the end of the night, Leon brought in a small wool blanket. "Found it in my attic," he said. "No tag." Sailor sniffed it, then sneezed softly. Graham recognized the stitch from the old dog blankets upstairs. Binding sewn by hand, corners reinforced, wool soft from use. "Display or repair?" Leon asked. Graham ran his thumb over the edge. For a moment he imagined every dog that had slept under such blankets while adults sat in kitchens, finding ways to keep going without making a spectacle of need. "Repair," he said. "Then use." So they did. When the blanket was finished, Graham placed it in Sailor's corner by the kitchen stove. Sailor circled once, settled onto it, and sighed so deeply that everyone in the room laughed. That laugh may have been the real ending, though no one knew it then. Not because everything was fixed. The house still creaked, bills still arrived, volunteers still disagreed about thread storage. Graham still had mornings when he woke before dawn with his mind already sorting worries into lists. But now, when he came downstairs, there were signs of other hands. A note from Pearl about donated needles, a loaf wrapped on the counter, a repaired latch he had not gotten to yet, a new entry in the ledger from someone who had traded 2 hours of sanding for a coat repair and written "thank you" in careful block letters. He was no longer useful in theory. He was useful in practice. One spring morning, almost a year after the auction, Graham stood outside the Wynn place while fog lifted from the harbor. The house looked different. Not polished, better than polished. Awake. The porch rail was straight. The windows were clean. The side door had a small brass bell. The sign by the walk read, "Wynn Mending Room, Thursdays, repairs and skill trades, all adults welcome." Sailor sat beside him watching the road. A car slowed. The driver waved. Graham waved back before he could think better of it. From the outside, it looked like a simple restoration story. A man bought an old house, fixed it up, found a locked room, and turned it into something sweet. But that was the easy version. The truer version was quieter. A man who thought he had been set aside found a room where nothing useful had ever truly been discarded. A dog followed lavender, wool, cedar, and loose thread until a hidden entrance opened. A town remembered that repair was not only for fabric, and dignity was not something you offered in speeches. It was something you protected in procedures, side doors, posted prices, clean wrapping paper, and the simple question Graham now asked without fear. What needs fixing? On that morning, Sailor stood suddenly and trotted toward the porch. Graham followed. At the side door, a paper bag waited with a note pinned to the fold. Inside were 3 worn aprons, a tin of buttons, and a spool of lavender thread. The note read, "Thought this place could use these." Graham looked at Sailor. "Well," he said, "let's put them where they belong." He opened the door, turned on the kitchen light, and placed the thread in the cabinet marked lavender and wool. Then he entered the donation in the ledger, not because anyone needed proof, but because someone, someday, might need to know how a town came back to itself. One useful task at a time. Sailor lay down on the repaired wool blanket by the stove. The house warmed around them, and for the first time in years, Graham did not feel like he had returned to the place that rejected him. He felt like he had been trusted with the place that had been waiting for him to notice the thread beneath the door.